there was a sound. Maybe it was a song, maybe it was a voice, someone else's, from across a room carrying a particular tone that had nothing to do with you and everything to do with you. Maybe it was silence itself, arriving with a weight that silence has no right to carry, pressing into you in the middle of something ordinary. Whatever it was, it reached you before you could decide whether to let it in. That's how you know it wasn't random. You don't let things in that fast. You've learned not to. But this one didn't ask. It landed somewhere below the throat and above the stomach. Not pain, not longing exactly, something older than either of those. A kind of recognition you couldn't trace to any single memory. The sound carried a name without saying it. It carried a feeling you've been trying to keep at a reasonable distance. And for just a moment, before the rational mind could form a single useful sentence, you were completely inside it. That's why you're here. Not because an algorithm guessed correctly, because something in you has been waiting for a space where that recognition could finally be spoken out loud rather than managed into silence. Before we go any further, like this video, subscribe, and write in the comments. I'm ready to receive. Say it as you type it. That's not a small thing. That's your nervous system signing in for what comes next. Because what comes next will ask something of you. Not effort, not analysis. Presence. And presence, for someone who has spent as long as you have inside the very specific ache of almost enough time, almost the right moment, almost ready, is harder than any effort you've ever made. Here is what you need to understand about today. Not tomorrow, not 6 months from now. Today, July 24th, 2026, two planets have aligned with a precision so exact it happens only rarely, and what they have opened between them is not a metaphor. It is a door. And if you felt something arrive through a sound before you arrived here, that wasn't coincidence. That was the door giving notice. The door is open, and you are the specific person it opened for. What you are about to hear is not about what you want to happen. It is about what is already in motion. There is a difference between those two things, and by the time this transmission is finished, you will feel that difference in your body in a way that does not go away when the screen goes dark. Let's begin. There is a moment, and you know exactly the kind of moment this is, when you arrive at a quiet fork in the middle of an ordinary day. Not a dramatic one, not the kind that announces itself, just a small, invisible split. The easier direction is right there, fully available, nothing forcing you away from it. You could take it. No one would know the difference. No one is watching. You didn't take it. Not once, but many times, in many versions of that same quiet moment. And what that required wasn't willpower. It wasn't even strength in the way people usually mean the word. It was something closer to fidelity, a loyalty to something true that was sitting inside you before you had the language for it. You stayed faithful to that thing even when there was no external evidence it deserved your faithfulness. Even when staying faithful cost you the easier direction, the relief of resolution, the comfort of simply letting the smaller version of this be enough. That is what this portal recognizes. Not your longing, not your effort. That specific, unwitnessed fidelity to the truth of what this connection is in those ordinary moments when no one was watching and taking the easier path would have changed nothing anyone else could see. Mercury sextile Venus. When most people hear those words, they think of charm, of attraction, of pleasant conversation. And yes, on the surface of ordinary days, that is some of what these two planets produce together. Mercury is the planet that governs how things are communicated, not just in words, in everything that carries meaning from one place to another. The tone a voice takes when it says your name, the particular weight a silence holds when it comes from someone who knows exactly what they feel, the way a song can contain an entire relationship without a single word being accurate. Mercury is the force behind all of that, the intelligence that moves between hearts and translates what cannot be said directly into something the body receives anyway. Venus is older. Venus is not attraction in the shallow sense. Venus is the force that governs what you value at the deepest level, not what you prefer, not what you find pleasant, what you recognize as genuinely worth something. Venus is the part of you that has never been deceived about what real connection feels like, even when the mind was busy constructing convincing explanations for why the absence of it was acceptable. Venus knows. She has always known. She keeps a precise and unflinching ledger. When Mercury and Venus align in a sextile, a specific angle of cooperation and flow, what happens between them is a kind of opening. The walls between what is felt and what can finally be expressed become momentarily thinner, not dissolved entirely. This is not a flood. This is a precise window. A sextile is not a dramatic collision of forces. It is a door, quietly unlocking. The kind that makes no sound, but the difference between locked and open is total. Today, this sextile is nearly perfect. The orb, the gap between the two planets, is 0.2 degrees. In practical terms, that means the opening is as close to exact as it ever gets. The difference in feeling between a sextile at 4 degrees and a sextile at 0.2 degrees is the difference between a door that is slightly ajar and a door that is swung fully, silently open. Mercury sits at 16 degrees of Cancer. Cancer is the sign of emotional memory, not the past as nostalgia, but the past as living tissue, feelings stored in the body, knowing that arrives without a logical source, the kind of truth that surfaces from somewhere beneath language. Mercury in Cancer does not simply transmit information, it transmits feeling as information. What gets carried in this placement is not what was said, it is what was always meant. Venus sits at 16 degrees of Virgo. Virgo is precise. Virgo is discerning. Virgo does not accept the approximate version of something when the real version is available. Venus in Virgo knows the difference between love and the performance of love, between depth and the comfortable presentation of depth. She is patient, but she is not indefinitely patient. She has been waiting for something to be expressed with accuracy. And today, with Mercury in the sign of emotional truth aligned almost exactly with Venus in the sign of precise discernment, what gets expressed is not the comfortable version. It is the true one. This is not a transit about pleasant feelings. This is a transit about true ones being finally capable of moving. And there is one more thing. Alongside this exact sextile, Mercury is in a square to Saturn, a tension that has been pressing on communication, creating friction between what is felt and what feels safe to say. That friction is what has held the door partially closed. Today, with Venus pulling from Virgo's precision and Mercury's square to Saturn reaching its own moment of pressure, what the friction has been preventing is finally finding its way through, not despite the tension. Because of it, the pressure built something. What was built is now moving. This is not a love story about hope. This is a love story about timing. And the timing is not accidental. This portal does not open for everyone who wants it to open. Wanting is not the key. The key is something more specific, more quietly demanding, and you have been forging it for longer than you know. This activates for the person who kept showing up with full emotional presence inside a connection that was not yet capable of returning it completely. Not naively, you knew what was there and what wasn't. You felt the gap. You named it, at least to yourself, with honest precision. And you continued showing up anyway, not to fix it, not to force it into a different shape, but because the truth of what you felt did not stop being true simply because the timing was imperfect. That is not weakness. That is one of the rarest forms of emotional intelligence that exists. What you lived through in the space before this moment was not rejection. It was redirection. Every moment you were pointed away from a version of this story that was not yet ready for you was a moment the universe was quietly steering you toward a version that was. It didn't feel that way from the inside. It rarely does when you're inside it. From the inside, redirection feels like a door closing. From the outside of it, with enough distance, it reveals itself as a course correction so precise that it required the exact delay it took. What you experienced in the silence was not silence as an answer, it was silence as selection. What that silence was selecting for was a version of you that could arrive at this connection with enough of your own interior settled that the connection wouldn't have to become the answer to a question you were still carrying, because that is what would have happened if this had arrived earlier. Not dramatically, quietly, gradually, the connection would have become the carrier for a question that was yours to answer, not theirs. And when a connection carries a question that belongs to someone's interior, it bends under the weight. It cannot do what it was meant to do because it is doing something else entirely. The time it took was not too long. It was exactly long enough, not by one day more than necessary, exactly long enough for something in you to settle into its own answer about your worth, about what you deserve to receive, about what love actually looks like when both people arrive without needing the connection to resolve something they haven't yet resolved in themselves. That is what you are bringing to this door today. Not the accumulated weight of waiting, the specific hard-won clarity of someone who answered their own question before asking someone else to answer it for them. And what you built, what you kept building when the building was producing no visible results, when the internal progress was entirely real and the external confirmation had gone completely quiet, that unrewarded work is the precise credential this portal accepts. Stay with this. What comes next is the part most people miss, because it requires accepting that something on the other side of this connection has been changing too, in its own time, in its own way, under its own particular pressure. There is someone in your field, someone who matters to you in a way that does not yield to time or logic or the quiet daily effort to stop mattering. And right now, today, under this exact alignment, they are sitting at the edge of something they have been sitting at the edge of for longer than they have admitted to themselves. This is not someone who has been suppressing what they feel. Not today, not in the way people usually suppress, building walls and filling the space with distraction and forward motion. This person has moved past that phase. The walls did their work for a while, and then they stopped working, and this person knows they stopped working. What is happening right now is something different. It is the specific weight of someone who is completely aware of what they feel, completely aware of what honesty would require them to do, and sitting in the full heaviness of that gap between knowing and acting. They are the almost ready, not afraid, not running, not rationalizing with the kind of reasons that still feel convincing when said aloud. The reasons they have been living with have quietly lost their hold. They can feel that. And what remains, once the reasons run out, is simply the size of what being honest would require, the admission to themselves first, then the admission outward. Today, Mercury sextile Venus creates a specific pressure on this particular internal state, the opening between feeling and expression, the door between what is known and what gets said. It is at its most available. And what the almost ready person feels right now is that availability as something almost uncomfortable, like standing in a room where every exit suddenly leads in the same direction. The intelligence of Mercury in Cancer is landing on them as a kind of insistence, not external, but internal. Something in their own awareness is pressing toward expression with a force it didn't have yesterday. What does that feel like in the body? It feels like the specific quality of attention that keeps redirecting. They begin doing something ordinary, something that belongs to the day, and find themselves within minutes back inside the awareness of you, not as a dramatic visitation, as a fact. The way hunger is a fact, the way the body returning toward what it needs feels different from the way it reaches toward what it wants. This is not reaching. This is returning. There is a difference, and they can feel it. The thing they keep almost doing, the message not yet typed, the conversation not yet begun, the truth not yet said aloud even in private, is not waiting because they don't want to. It is waiting because they can feel the full weight of what happens after. Once the truth is said, the space between you changes. They know this, and the full acknowledgement of that change, what it means, what it asks of them, who it requires them to be, is where they are right now. They know. They have always known. Today is the day the knowing became too heavy to carry quietly. This is not a dramatic moment in the way the outside world would recognize it. Nothing visible is happening. But in the internal field, in the space where this connection lives, something that was held back is pressing against its own edges with more force than it has had before. And that force is not going to diminish. It is going to keep building until honesty becomes the easier option. And under today's alignment, that threshold is closer than it has ever been. Here is where you stand right now, in this exact moment. Two different internal states are available to you. They feel similar from the outside. From the inside, they are completely different countries with different climates, different orientations, different futures opening out from them. No one is watching this moment. That is exactly what makes it the most important one. One internal state knows that what it feels is real and needs that knowing confirmed before it can fully trust it. It leans toward the signal, it scans, it calculates. If I do this, will they respond in a way that tells me my feeling is accurate? If I stay quiet, how long before the silence tells me I was wrong? It is not a bad state. It kept you functional through a period when external feedback was the only available evidence. But that state carries a particular cost. It keeps the knowing dependent. The knowing exists, but it exists on borrowed oxygen. It needs the external environment to keep breathing. The other internal state has something different underneath it, not more certainty, the same feeling, the same love, the same awareness of what is real between you, but the ground beneath it is different. It doesn't grip, not because it doesn't care. This state cares completely, but caring and gripping are not the same country. One contracts everything around what it wants, tightening until the want becomes the loudest thing in the room. The other carries the want without requiring it to be confirmed to be real. The shoulders settle, the breath goes 1 degree deeper without being asked. Something that was running a background check on every incoming signal is finally resting. Can you feel the difference between those two states right now? Not as a concept, but somewhere in your body? The almost ready person in your field is being pressed toward truth by a transit that does not reward urgency. What reaches them is not the signal of someone contracting around what they want. What reaches them, and this is the part that changes everything, is the signal of someone who already knows what is real and is no longer requiring external confirmation to remain certain. The soul does not ask this question to punish you. It asks it because the answer determines everything that follows, not as consequence, but as direction. Which state are you actually in right now? Not which state do you intend to be in, not which state you've been working toward, the one that is actually present in your body, right now, as you sit with this. The answer to that question is already in the body. It arrived before the mind formed the words. Trust what was there first. There is a level beneath the feeling, beneath the longing, beneath even the question of what happens next with this connection. A level where what this entire experience was actually about becomes visible. Every connection that carries this quality of weight, the kind that doesn't yield to time, to logic, to the quiet daily effort to be reasonable about it, is carrying a contract. Not a romantic promise, something more precise and more demanding than a promise, an agreement that was made before either person was aware they were making it. There is something that must be learned here, not between you, inside you. This connection is the curriculum. The other person is not the destination. They are the precise instrument through which a specific piece of your interior education arrives. The contract in your case was specifically about timing, not timing as patience, timing as readiness. The soul contract came to teach you the difference between love and readiness arriving simultaneously. That the right connection at the wrong internal moment is still the wrong moment, regardless of how real the feeling is. That you cannot collapse the space that genuine connection needs to form correctly, no matter how much the longing wants you to. This is why the pressure you've been living with has had a particular flavor. Not absence, not rejection, but almost. The almost was the specific curriculum, not a mistake, not a wound to be healed, a lesson being taught with precision. Because here is the grief inside that, and it deserves a full stop, a full paragraph, the respect of not being rushed past. There is genuine grief in recognizing that the connection you have been carrying was always also a classroom, that the depth of what you felt was real and also functional, that someone you love was simultaneously the person and the teacher, that the longing, the waiting, the particular ache of almost all of it was working. Doing something that had to be done, whether or not it felt like anything other than suffering while it was happening. That grief is real. Don't skip it. It is part of what this transit is completing. The contract was specific, not forever, not even reunion, but the permanent, irreversible shift in how you understand what love requires of you. What love requires is not just feeling, not just depth, not even shared recognition, though that matters. What love requires is that both people arrive ready, genuinely ready, not ready enough, not almost ready if the other person would just commit. Structurally, internally, actually ready. And that readiness cannot be manufactured or hurried. It arrives when the internal work it requires is genuinely complete. You are arriving ready now, not because you decided to be, because what the curriculum required of you has been genuinely learned, not performed, not adopted as a hopeful identity, but integrated into the actual substance of who you are. The knowing has moved out of the mind and into the body. It lives in you as fact, not philosophy. What completion actually looks like through the lens of timing is this: you can hold the love without collapsing the space it needs. You can be fully present to what is real without trying to force its arrival before both people are actually ready for it. You can carry the connection with open hands instead of gripped ones. That is not detachment. That is the very specific grace that this contract came to build inside you. What ends here is not the love. What ends is the version of the connection that could only exist while the lesson was still unfinished. The love, if it was real, does not require the dynamic to survive. Something is settling in you right now that is not numbness and is not resignation and is not the comfortable lie that you no longer care. It is something rarer and harder to name, a quality of stillness that has weight to it, that has earned its own depth. Your body knows this before your mind has put language on it. There is a quiet in your chest that has no urgency behind it, not the quiet of having given up. You know the difference between those two because you have lived in the other kind long enough to recognize what this one is not. This is the quiet of something that is settling into itself after a long period of being held at a particular level of readiness. Sleep is different now. It arrives earlier in the evening and it leaves less residue in the first minutes of morning, that specific heaviness that used to sit on the chest before the day had even started, before a single thing had gone wrong, simply because the unresolved thing was still there waiting. That residue is thinner now. Some mornings it is barely there. The name, when it arrives, and it still arrives, you're not pretending otherwise, passes through awareness differently. Where it once snagged something, once hooked into a particular quality of bracing, now it moves through more like weather, present, recognized, and then continuing. The body no longer organizes itself around it the way it once did. Something that was a fixed point the whole interior arranged itself around has become, gradually, something that simply passes. There is a stillness in the middle of ordinary moments that is unfamiliar enough to be noticeable. The background process that used to run, the constant low-level monitoring of incoming signals, the anticipatory preparation for the next wave of uncertainty. That process is running more quietly, not silenced, quieter. The nervous system is learning, slowly but genuinely, that not every silence is a verdict, not every gap in contact is an answer about worth. And the jaw. Notice the jaw. There is a moment, usually in the middle of doing something entirely ordinary, when it releases without being asked. Not from having been held tight, you weren't consciously holding it, but from the habitual low-grade holding that the body had been doing without your permission as its continuous quiet response to the unresolved thing. When the jaw releases in the middle of an ordinary sentence without instruction, that is the body announcing that something it was bracing against is no longer coming. This is not the quiet of having given up. This is the quiet of something that has genuinely finished. The body knows the difference, even when the mind is still catching up, and the external shape of your days is reflecting this. Not in dramatic ways, not in a single event that announced the shift. In the texture of how desire sits in you now. 6 months ago, when you thought about what you wanted, really let yourself go there, into the wanting. There was something at the bottom of it that functioned like urgency, not always visible, but there. A tightening that accompanied the want, a pressure that turned desire into something that needed to resolve. The wanting and the needing were tangled together, and the tangle produced a quality in the reach, a leaning forward, a scanning, an orientation that was always slightly ahead of where you actually were. Something about that quality has changed. When you let yourself move toward what you want now, toward the connection, toward the future, toward the life that has been taking shape inside you through all of this, there is a different quality underneath the wanting. A fullness rather than a gap. A sense of moving towards something rather than away from the feeling that the thing is missing. The reach has become something closer to receiving. This is not a philosophy you have adopted. This is a change in how the body relates to what it wants. And that change, From wanting that originates in lack to wanting that originates in fullness is one of the most significant internal shifts a person can make. Because what originates in fullness does not require urgency to stay real. It does not collapse when the arrival takes longer than expected. It does not confuse the delay for the answer. This is why this transit is landing differently for you than it would have 6 months ago. This is why you are receiving it as expansion rather than hope. Hope comes from lack. What you are feeling right now comes from somewhere else. The part of you that needed outside confirmation to feel certain has completed its work. What remains does not require reflection to stay real. It simply is. That is not a small change. That is the whole change. And with that change comes something that cannot be negotiated with, cannot be reasoned around, cannot be softened into a more convenient version of itself. Certain things have become unavailable to your nervous system, not as a decision you made, not as a boundary you constructed and are now maintaining through effort, as a biological fact about what you can and cannot move toward anymore. Being held at emotional arm's length by someone who knows exactly what they feel, your system no longer accommodates this. It used to. There was a period when you could translate that arm's length into something livable, could find enough meaning in the partial presence to sustain yourself on it. That capacity is gone now. Not because you became harder, because you became more honest about what partial presence actually costs, paid over time, in the specific currency of your own interior. Carrying the full weight of a connection while the other person remains comfortable in its ambiguity, your body identifies this now before the mind has even formed a verdict. It registers as a particular kind of wrong note, not the dramatic wrongness of an obvious mismatch, the quiet, specific wrongness of a frequency that is almost right and isn't. A trained ear hears a wrong note without deliberation. It doesn't decide the note is wrong. It simply knows. That is what your nervous system is doing now with ambiguity, knowing before deciding, registering before analyzing, waiting for honesty that the other person has already decided you don't deserve. This is the one that used to be the hardest to name because it could always be dressed as patience. It looked like patience from the outside. It felt like patience in the moments when the alternative was too painful to sit with. But your system is no longer willing to let patience be the cover story for what is actually happening when someone knows their truth and withholds it. There is a difference between someone who is genuinely not yet clear and someone who is clear and has decided clarity is not something they owe you. Your body knows that difference now. It knew it then too. But now it is no longer willing to argue itself out of the knowing. This is not hardness. There is nothing hard in you right now. Hardness is a defense, and what has happened inside you is not the building of a defense, it is the dissolution of the need for one. You did not close yourself, you clarified. And clarity does not reduce what is possible, it removes what was never going to be real anyway, and makes the remaining space available for what actually is. So, when the question of return arrives, and it does arrive, it arrives for everyone who has carried what you have carried because the mind needs to know what to do with the possibility. Here is what is true. If this soul steps back into your field now, they will not be returning to the person they left. That version of you completed its contract. What they return to is someone who is no longer organized around the question of whether they arrive. And the first thing you will notice, before any thought forms, before any evaluation begins, is something in the body. A reading. The nervous system will take in whatever they bring and register it with a clarity that has not always been available to you. Because what used to distort the signal, the hope bending it in one direction, the fear bending it in the other, is no longer producing that same interference. What arrives will be received accurately, for the first time. That accuracy is not cold. It is not the absence of feeling. You will feel everything, but the feeling will arrive without the distortion of need reshaping it into what you want it to mean. If what they bring is genuine, if the transformation behind their presence is real and not performed, if what they are returning with is a version of themselves that has done the work that this connection required of them too, your body will know. It will not need to be convinced. Something will settle rather than brace. Something will open rather than monitor. The quality of their presence, sustained over time, will confirm what the first moment suggested. You will receive it from ground that belongs entirely to you, not from the posture of someone who needed this arrival to feel whole. And if what they bring is the familiar version, the same energy dressed in new language, the same dynamic wearing the presentation of growth, that accuracy will register that too. Without drama, without the need to perform a verdict, simply as a fact that the body receives before the mind has decided what to do with it, the signal will be legible, and you, standing in the specific clarity you have built, will be capable of reading it without hope distorting the result. If they do not return, address this not as a consolation, but as its own complete truth. Non-return, from inside the clarity you have now, does not arrive as loss in the way it once would have. It arrives as confirmation. Confirmation that whatever the contract between you was, your side of it is complete. That the completion of your side does not require their participation to be real. What you have built inside yourself through this, the timing lesson genuinely learned, the capacity to hold love with open hands rather than gripped ones, the ability to carry what is real without needing it to resolve on your schedule, none of that disappears if they don't walk back through the door. It is yours. It was always going to be yours. The contract delivered what it promised, whether they return or not. Both doors open onto something real now, not because the outcomes are equal, because you are no longer different people depending on which one walks through. That steadiness is the thing. That is everything. One thing before you leave this space. If something in this transmission landed, not just in the mind, but somewhere lower, somewhere that doesn't use language, honor that. Like this video. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next in this window. These transmissions are not isolated events. They build on each other, and what opens today is directly connected to what arrives in the next alignment. And in the comments, write, "I receive what is real." Say it out loud as you type it, not for anyone reading, for your own nervous system, for the part of you that has been waiting for permission to stop waiting. Words spoken with intention complete something that silent reading leaves open. Say it out loud. That matters more than it sounds. And if someone in your life is standing at a threshold they cannot yet name, someone who has been carrying something heavy through ordinary days without letting anyone fully see it, share this with them. Your instinct about who that is has already arrived. Trust it. The love portal that opened today between Mercury and Venus is not a symbol. It is not a metaphor for something that might happen. It is a precise energetic fact. Two planets at near exact alignment, creating a genuine window in which what has been held between feeling and expression becomes capable of moving. That window is open right now, not tomorrow, now. And you did not find your way here by accident, and you did not do what you've done across this entire stretch of time for nothing. The sound that reached you before you arrived here, the one that landed below thought and above language and carried something older than either chi, that was the opening announcing itself, not as a sign to be interpreted, as a fact to be received. You are not still waiting for this to begin. It has already begun. What arrives now arrives to someone who is ready, genuinely, quietly, completely ready. Not ready the way hope is ready, leaning forward into what it needs. Ready the way someone is ready when they have settled into who they actually are. When the question that used to govern everything has stopped requiring an answer. When the door that just opened leads not into uncertainty, but into the clearest version of what has always been real. This is not a new beginning. This is an arrival. And arrivals don't announce themselves with fanfare. They simply appear, quietly, unmistakably, in the specific shape of what was always coming. And the body, which knew before the mind did, receives them without surprise. You are already inside it.